At 1837 local time, a Japanese F-15 was performing standard patrol duties near the Chinese carrier Liaoning, positioned southeast of Okinawa, when his radar warning receiver suddenly shifted from its usual chirp to an urgent wail. A Chinese J-15 emerged through the cloud cover and immediately acquired fire control radar lock on the Japanese jet. The logical move would have been to break away and call it in. Instead, the Japanese pilot rolled hard right into the threat, and honestly, that took some serious nerve. He shoved the stick right and drove the nose downward. The F-15 executed a snap roll through 90 degrees, diving hard and pulling 5 Gs as the world tilted sideways. In just 2 seconds, the J-15 had shifted from his 11 o'clock position to his 3 o'clock, no longer leading him, but perpendicular to his flight path. The radar's warble cut out. Target lost. The Type 1493 radar can theoretically detect a fighter at 150 kilometers and track up to 6 aircraft at once. On paper, it sounds impressive. In reality, it has a blind spot the size of the South China Sea. Chinese military procurement in a nutshell. A PowerPoint that promises the world, performance that disappoints. The technique is called beaming, and it exploits a flaw built into every pulse Doppler radar ever made. These systems work by measuring your closure rate, how fast you're approaching. They use the same physics that makes an ambulance siren pitch higher as it draws near, the Doppler effect. Move perpendicular to the radar beam, and your closure rate drops to 0. The system's own filters kick in and classify you as ground clutter, the same way it ignores ocean waves, trees, and buildings. You disappear. The Japanese pilot held that beam steady, eyes locked on his JAPR-4 radar warning receiver. Antennas scattered across the F-15's frame, wingtips, tail, nose, were capturing every electromagnetic pulse and feeding him real-time intelligence. The JAPR-4 operates like a fingerprint scanner for radar systems. Every radar has a unique signature, its frequency, its pulse rhythm, its waveform shape. The receiver compares incoming signals against a library of over 2,000 known systems, identifying the source within milliseconds. When it encounters something worthwhile, it doesn't just identify, it records. Every transmission the J-15 sent while hunting for its lost target streamed to Japanese intelligence via encrypted satellite. 8 seconds of data, 8 seconds of Chinese radar revealing exactly how it hunts. Future jammers could now be tuned to that exact frequency. Future missiles programmed to home in on it. The Japanese pilot keyed his radio, voice measured and calm. Contact maneuvering, lock broken, re-established, collecting. When the Liaoning Group's fighter returned with its lock restored, the Chinese pilot had repositioned, adjusted his angle, reacquired. He probably felt satisfied. Target found, point made, dominance demonstrated. He had no idea his radar had just handed over its first secret. And he definitely didn't know this F-15 wasn't alone. In electronic warfare terms, this was the equivalent of showing your entire poker hand to the table and asking everyone how you're doing. 2 additional Eagles had launched from Naha alongside him, now holding steady at 35,000 feet, with their radars dark and invisible to Chinese sensors. They were watching the whole show through ground control's eyes. They weren't there to help, not yet. They were waiting. The Japanese pilot noted the reacquisition time, 8 seconds. Now he needed to test something new. The J-15 closed to 500 meters, pressing hard, lock solid. This time, the Japanese pilot went vertical. He pulled hard toward the Chinese fighter, nose rising through the horizon, airspeed dropping from 450 knots as gravity fought the F-15. At the peak of the climb, He rolled inverted and pulled through a split S that flipped his direction and dropped him 3,000 feet in 4 seconds. The J-15 lost him again. This happened because the J-15 uses a mechanically scanned radar. Its antenna physically tilts to track targets. Picture a security camera on a motorized mount. It can follow movement, but only as fast as the motor allows. The Japanese pilot had moved faster than the motor could track. The antenna was still pointed up when his target dove past below. In the next engagement, Allied pilots would know exactly how hard to pull to outrun that antenna. This matters because China's newer fighters, the J-16 and J-20, use electronically scanned arrays that steer their beams with physics instead of moving parts. Near instantaneous tracking. But the J-15 was designed in the 1990s using 1980s Soviet technology. The Liaoning's air wing was flying yesterday's equipment against a pilot trained specifically to exploit exactly that weakness. The Chinese pilot didn't wait 8 seconds this time. He anticipated the vertical escape, shoved his nose down, and reacquired in 5. He was learning, adapting, improving. He was also getting frustrated. The J-15 closed to 400 meters. At that distance, the Japanese pilot could see the engine glow from the Chinese fighter, watch the control surfaces adjusting in the turbulent air. He could see the weapons pylons, 2 PL-12 radar-guided missiles under the wings, China's answer to the American AMRAAM with its 100 kilometers range and active seeker, 2 PL-8 heat seekers on the wingtips for close-range work, close enough that his next move couldn't be tentative, close enough that hesitation meant collision. Lock. The warble filled his helmet. He broke hard left, but this time he didn't just escape. He kept the turn rolling, pulling 6 Gs through 180 degrees until his nose pointed straight back at the J-15. For a frozen instant, both aircraft headed directly toward each other. The Chinese pilot flinched first. He expected another defensive break, another attempt to run. That's what targets do. They run, they evade, they try to survive until they can disengage. They don't turn into the threat with their nose up and their radar warming. But this eagle wasn't running. He was charging straight at him, like he was trying to break through a wall. The Chinese pilot wrenched his aircraft right to avoid the head-on pass, breaking his own lock to escape a merge he hadn't planned for. For 3 seconds, neither aircraft had the other on radar. When the Chinese pilot reacquired 4 seconds later, the F-15 wasn't ahead anymore. It was beside him, 3 o'clock. The Japanese pilot had used that aggressive break to gain 40 degrees of angle, working himself around the J-15's clock. This wasn't defense, it was positioning. The reacquisition pattern was now in the database. How the J-15 searches after losing lock, what frequencies it uses, how it switches from search to track. The next pilot facing this radar would know exactly where to hide during those blind seconds. The Chinese pilot pressed closer, 350 meters. He wasn't letting this eagle slip away again. He had no idea what was about to happen. Each break had carried the F-15 slightly further around the J-15's beam. 3 o'clock became 4. 4 became 5. The Japanese pilot was maneuvering toward the one place a nose-mounted radar can never see. Above them, at 35,000 feet, the other 2 eagles began a slow descent. On the ground at Naha, controllers watched the geometry unfold on their scopes. Eagle 2, Eagle 3, descend to Angels 28. Maintain radar silent, vector 185. The 2 silent F-15s acknowledged with a single click each. No voice transmissions for the Chinese to intercept. Just geometry playing out exactly as planned. The trap was almost set. The Chinese pilot just needed to make one more mistake. Lock again, this time at 300 meters. The Japanese pilot broke right, textbook beam maneuver. The warble went silent for 3 seconds before screaming back. The Chinese pilot was reacquiring faster now, anticipating the defensive turns, cutting off escape routes before they opened. He thought this was dominance. 20 minutes of chasing this eagle through the darkening sky. 20 minutes of reacquiring after every break. And the target was still here, still dancing, still refusing to disengage. Eventually, the Japanese pilot would run low on fuel or make a mistake. Time was on the Chinese side, or so it seemed from his cockpit. What he didn't notice was that each reacquisition took marginally longer. When the F-15 broke toward his tail, the radar's gimbal limits, how far off his nose it could look, were becoming a constraint. The target kept appearing at the edge of his scope, forcing him to turn his entire aircraft to maintain lock. That burned fuel. That burned energy. That cost the one thing he couldn't afford to lose: situational awareness. Lock 280 meters, the closest yet. The Japanese pilot broke hard right then down, pulling 7 Gs as he combined horizontal and vertical movement. His suit crushed his legs. Vision narrowed to a tunnel. The sky turned gray at the edges. Every breath came as a grunt forced through clenched teeth. The airframe groaned, shuddering at the edge of its design envelope. The lock broke. Pulse repetition pattern captured. Another page added to the technical manual. This time, the Chinese pilot anticipated the compound maneuver. Instead of searching where the F-15 had been, he predicted where it was going. He hauled his nose down and left. Reacquisition in 2 seconds. Now he was close. Too close. The J-15 slid into position, 200 meters off the F-15's wing, sliding slightly ahead, its pilot staring across the gap. At this distance, the wake turbulence from either aircraft could throw the other into an uncontrolled roll. One wrong input, one moment of tunnel vision, and 40,000 pounds of fighter would cartwheel through the space the other occupied. Neither pilot would have time to eject. The Chinese pilot held position, his radar still locked, transmitting and painting the eagle with enough electromagnetic energy to guide a missile all the way. This was Beijing's message: we can touch you whenever we want. The Japanese pilot held steady. He didn't break. He didn't flinch. His eyes moved between the J-15 off his wing and the radar warning receiver in his cockpit. Steady, he told himself. Let him transmit. But here's what the Chinese pilot didn't understand. A fire control radar transmitting at 200 meters gives away everything, not just frequency and pulse patterns. At this range, the JAPR-4 was measuring power output curves, side lobe characteristics, even the subtle frequency drift revealing the radar's internal temperature. Data that would normally take years to collect was being delivered in minutes. The next time a Type 1493 locked onto an Allied aircraft, electronic warfare systems would know exactly which frequencies to flood with noise. 10 seconds. 15 seconds. Neither pilot moved. The Japanese pilot waited for the Chinese fighter to drift back to a safer distance. Then he broke. Snap roll left, nose down. He dove through the J-15's flight path, pulling hard, the horizon spinning as he passed beneath the Chinese fighter's belly at 150 meters. His aircraft bucked violently as he crossed through the jet wash, superheated exhaust still rolling off the J-15's engines at 1,000 degrees. The F-15's right wing dipped 30 degrees as the disturbed air grabbed at his control surfaces. For half a second, the aircraft wasn't flying. It was falling sideways, beaten by invisible turbulence shed by 40,000 pounds of fighter above him. He corrected, jammed the stick right, added power. The Eagle clawed back to stable flight. Still turning, still pulling, still working the geometry. When he rolled out, he was behind the J-15. 7 o'clock, inside the radar's gimbal limits. Invisible. The Chinese pilot's scope was empty. For the first time in nearly 22 minutes, he had no target. The F-15 hadn't just broken lock, it had vanished into the one place his radar couldn't see. He craned his neck left, then right, searching visually through the canopy. Nothing. He checked his mirrors, those small reflective surfaces mounted on the canopy frame, a fighter pilot's only view behind. Nothing. Yes, you heard that right. A mirror on a $50 million fighter jet. The same blind spot solution your grandmother uses in her Honda Civic. To be frank, that's peak Chinese engineering right there. The Eagle's gray paint dissolved into the twilight sea below, invisible against the darkening water. His radar warning receiver was silent. The Japanese pilot's radar remained in standby, refusing to transmit, refusing to reveal his position. The only sound in the Chinese cockpit was his own breathing and the steady hum of systems searching for something they couldn't find. Where was he? The Japanese pilot could have ended this. His radar was warmed and ready. One button and the Chinese pilot's warning receiver would scream with the same fire control lock he'd been throwing for 22 minutes. But that wasn't the mission. Not yet. The Chinese pilot hauled his aircraft into a hard turn, trying to drag his nose around to where the target had to be. The radar swept forward. Nothing. He widened the scan. Nothing. The J-15 completed its turn, radar sweeping forward. Lock restored. The F-15 had used the blind spot escape to reposition even further around his clock. One more cycle, and the Eagle would be directly behind him. Enough of this. He slammed the throttles forward, lit the afterburners, and pulled toward the Japanese fighter. The J-15 leapt forward, acceleration shoving him back in his seat. Time to close the distance and end this dance. The F-15 broke toward him. Both aircraft were now heading toward each other. Closure rate over 900 knots, half a mile disappearing every 2 seconds. At this speed, there was no room for radar modes or gimbal limits or careful positioning. This was pure chicken. Two fighters in a game that ended in merge or collision. Nothing in between. The J-15 could pull 8 Gs and sustain Mach 2.4 in a straight line. None of that mattered now. This was about angles, not speed. And the Chinese pilot had just traded all of his away. 800 meters. The J-15's nose filled the Japanese pilot's windscreen. 600 meters. He could see the Chinese pilot's helmet through the opposing canopy. 400 meters. Commit point. Turn now or hit. 3 seconds to merge. The Japanese pilot's hand rested on the stick, waiting. 2 seconds. The J-15's canopy filled his entire forward view. 1 second. The Japanese pilot rolled inverted and pulled down, slicing beneath the J-15 in a 7G descending turn that traded head-on for perpendicular in less than a heartbeat. The Chinese fighter flashed overhead close enough that he felt the thump of displaced air as 40,000 pounds of aircraft passed through the space he'd occupied just a moment before. He kept rolling, pulled upright, checked his 6. The J-15 was ahead of him now, pulling its own turn to reacquire, but the geometry had flipped. The Japanese pilot was in the Chinese fighter's deep 6 o'clock, 400 meters back, low, perfectly positioned in the blind spot where nose-mounted radars cannot see. The Chinese pilot hauled around, searching for his target. Classic fighter pilot mistake. He'd been so focused on what was ahead that he'd forgotten the first rule of air combat. Check your six. His radar warning receiver lit up, not from behind, but from above. 2 new contacts at 10 o'clock high and 2 o'clock high, descending through 28,000 feet. F-15S, a pair from Naha that had been holding at 35,000 feet, with radars dark, invisible, steered through the entire engagement by ground control. They'd watched the geometry develop for 31 minutes. They'd waited for this exact moment. The Chinese pilot checked his six. The first eagle was there, 400 meters back and below his tail, inside his turn circle. He checked high. 2 more eagles dropping toward him, bracketing his escape routes east and west. Their radars now active, painting him for angles he couldn't answer. 3 aircraft, 3 radars, 0 pointed at them. His own radar was useless. It only looked forward, and the threats were behind and above. His missiles needed radar lock to guide, and he had no lock. He couldn't shoot, but they could. He did the math. Fuel state. 31 minutes of hard maneuvering had burned through his reserves. Wingman, still 5 minutes away at best. Tactical position. 1 bandit behind with energy advantage, 2 above with altitude advantage, all with solutions if this were real. The math was simple. He was finished. Medium well approaching well done. He'd spent 31 minutes trying to dominate a single Japanese fighter, but he'd been the target the entire time. The J-15's radar dropped to standby. The aircraft rolled wings level, descended toward the carrier group, and withdrew. No more locks, no more posturing. Just a Chinese fighter heading home with empty hands and a radar that had broadcast every secret it possessed. The Liaoning strike group departed the Philippine Sea 6 days later. Beijing called it a successful demonstration of carrier aviation capability. The radar lock was denied. Official statements claimed Japanese aircraft had harassed routine training. Tokyo called it extremely regrettable, summoned the ambassador, and filed protests. The pilots who flew it? They called it Tuesday. Bye for now.